We are live.
I want to welcome you to this episode of the Rogues Radio Podcast live. We are trying something different. We'll see how this all works out. My name is Dave Beatty, and I am one of your hosts. For the last 30 some odd years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things like Batman Incorporated, for example, Grifter, Superboy and Legion of Superheroes, X-Men, Sword of the Braddox, and too many other stuff to keep rattling off. Anyhow, I want to welcome, I'm going to say welcome back my co-host, because on the audio show, he's there every week. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks either watching or listening at home what you've done as a creative professional.
Well, thank you. And this is quite exciting, doing a live broadcast like this. This is definitely new ground for us. So I'm very excited to be here. And yes, my name is Eric Alexander, and I am your co-host for Rogues Radio Live, where you're going to get to be able to see some behind the scenes of how we put together these shows. And this may be a permanent format change. I am the associate producer of a feature film called Occupants, which stars Star Trek Voyager actor Robert Picardo. That film is currently available on Tubi, and that is a free streaming service, ad-based streaming service. And I was also the editor and publisher of the official Occupants comic book tie-in.
Very cool. So on the audio show, at this point, we always switch over and go to the TV and news roundup segment, which is basically where we talk about interesting things that we want to discuss that's happening in the world of TV and movie news. It's normally genre-focused or genre-specific. Tell me, Eric, what's interesting that's happening in the world of TV and movie news?
Well, honestly, I didn't see a whole lot of big stories on my end with movie and TV news, but I did see some interesting stuff that's going on in the world of YouTube, and with some various YouTube streamers that have been talking about some issues. The biggest one, I think, is, and I don't know if you heard about this, Dave, is that apparently the lawsuit with Discovery has been appealed. Did you hear about this?
I did.
So this is pretty interesting. So it seems that some battle lines are being drawn in the world of YouTube right now. Obviously, Nerdrotic is squarely on the side of Abdin. That's Abdin. I don't want to butcher his name. So for people that are not familiar with this lawsuit, Anas is a video game creator who was alleging that Star Trek Discovery took some specific elements from his video game and incorporated it into Star Trek Discovery. He's alleging that they took this stuff willfully. This was not a good faith kind of thing, and he did a lawsuit, and that lawsuit was recently dismissed. Now, apparently, Nerdrotic has come in with the fandom menace in full force, and they went ahead and did a GoFundMe, and they are actively helping Anas to appeal this decision. Now, where things get a little bit tricky is that there's another YouTuber, and I don't want to butcher his name, but it's Ketwolski, Ketwolski. Are you familiar with him, Dave?
Yes, I am.
So he does the Earl Grey Hour or something like the Earl Grey Roundup or something like that. I think is the show, what he calls his Star Trek show. Right.
Yeah, he does a Trek theme show.
And he actually has like the little Earl Grey teacup, which I really think is awesome. I would, especially now that we have video capability, I really want one of those. That would be really awesome. This is all I have right now, but which to our listeners, I'm just showing a Gatorade bottle that I put water in. But so he does a show that's actually very good in my opinion. He really gets into a lot of Trek, and to me, he's pretty fair, and he was a supporter of Anas's lawsuit. I want to make that clear for anybody who's not familiar with him. He was a supporter, but now he's changed his tune, and he put out a video that I recommend for people to take a look at, just to be informed, where he kind of went after Anas, and he specifically was taking screenshots from previous games that Anas has worked on and the game that he was working on at the time, And the thing I didn't realize about Anas is that his games have a lot of homage material. You familiar with this at all, Dave?
Yeah, I saw the video and I'm familiar with it. I mean, he showed, for example, like how I guess the intro for either the game in question, which just they're alleging that Discovery took things from, or well, we'll just say alleged, and basically it's the intro from the Dune movie. Basically, it's the what's it, Princess Irulan or whatever her name is, and she's doing the whole, the beginning is a very difficult time, and it's almost like the same thing from the David Lynch film. So
yeah, and actually, I seem to remember early in this lawsuit there was some talk that the I can't remember the specific aliens, but they're those large aliens that you see in the beginning of Dune. Some people actually did make comparisons between them and their role in Dune and the tardigrades. Did you ever hear that?
I didn't I didn't specifically, but I could see where people would see connections there.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that even when this lawsuit was in full form prior to this appeal, there were some people that were talking about that. It's interesting, this particular scene you're talking about where it's basically the voiceover at the beginning of the Dune feature film. Obviously that's an homage sequence. And there are other examples that, again, Ket Walski, I don't want to screw up his name, but Ket Walski talks about in terms of think like Galaxy Quest, other things. And Anas has responded to this. If anybody is curious, Anas has responded to these allegations on Twitter. And he's not calling out Ketwalski by name, because I looked at his Twitter account earlier, and he actually is addressing specific allegations that Ketwalski makes in his video, and he's defending himself. So I kind of want to let the public decide, but I do want to say that myself, I was all ready to go and promote the heck out of this appeal and to put my money where my mouth was. Support the GoFundMe. I do have the GoFundMe listed on my Twitter, and I haven't taken it down. It's still there. It's still available if people want to check it out. But right now, I'm very cautious of this situation. Personally, I am always for the indie creator. I am an indie creator. I am not affiliated with a big studio. I'm trying to create my own studio with Bad Bob Productions. I'm not affiliated with any large studio. Occupants was not made by a large studio. That was an independent feature film. So I'm always going to side with the independent creator. But I just want to say, I think it's important for people, if they're interested in this, to check out both sides and to examine it and process it and kind of make your own decision. And I don't think this story is going to go away. And I think we are going to keep covering it on our podcast. But I'm just kind of trying to give people a little warning out there and a little bit of insight about this appeal that's going on.
Very cool. So I think at this point we're going to segue because I don't have a lot of TV or movie news to discuss either, other than the fact that I kept hearing the new Star Wars trailer was going to drop, and it didn't drop. And I'm not happy about that because I feel like they're dragging this thing out, and I want another trailer so I can either feel, I don't know, more comfortable about it or outraged if I choose to feel that way. I think I'm going to feel outraged, but you know what I mean? It's just, I'm looking for more information for Rise of Skywalker, so I can either just, go, okay, and let it go, or I can be like, oh, this looks really fun, and kind of move on. But that's the only TV and movie news I have. Well, no, I take that back. We should actually talk about Robert Forster's passing. I never know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And of course, I don't have anything up, and we're live, so I'm stumbling here live. That's always good. I'm going to pull this up here real quick on my phone. No, yeah, Robert Forster passed away. Okay, here we go. I'm going to pull up his IMDb here real quick. So yeah, Robert Forster passed away. It seems like they're saying most people would be familiar with him for Heroes and Twin Peaks. But for me, I'll always remember Robert Forster as being the captain of the Palomino in the Disney film, The Black Hole. It's one of my favorite science fiction films of all time. And also, too, for those people who are real deep dive genre fans, they will remember he is the one who played the gumshoe film noir detective, sort of the Humphrey Bogart type character in Once a Hero. If anyone remembers the late short-lived television series Once a Hero, where fictional characters came into the real world, quote unquote, our real world, Robert Forster was the one who played the Humphrey Bogart and was clearly the best part of the show. He was so amazing in that. Of course, he was also in Jackie Brown, a tremendous actor. And I don't want this show to go forward without us mentioning his passing. But like I said, I've everything I've ever seen him in, I've always loved him in, and it's a real shame that he passed.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Black Hole, and that is actually a film that I think is very underrated. I've always enjoyed it. That's probably the work of his that I'm most familiar with. So, yes, I agree. It's a tragedy, but he did do some great work in his time, and we still have that work. So that's awesome.
Okay, so now we're going to move into this brand new segment that we have been discussing that we've never done before. This is going to be the Streaming Wars segment. So we're going to talk about a lot about this interesting stuff that's going on in the world of streaming. Now, streaming, of course, obviously we're talking about, things like Netflix and Hulu, the coming Disney Plus, and all the fun things, the CW app, all these different fun services, Crackle, for example, or Tubi, where you're going to be able to go in and stream all these amazing shows and movies, either as a pay service or for free with support from, commercials and that kind of thing. So this is our new Streaming Wars segment. So I know we've both got something interesting to talk about here. So Eric, I'll let you go first. What do you got to talk about on tonight's episode, or this episode's Streaming Wars segment?
Well, I actually got my lead from Midnight's Edge, which does some excellent reporting on this. They are actually using the term Streaming Wars. Here on our live broadcast, I just put on the hashtag Streaming Wars, which I don't think is being used very much yet, but we kind of want to be a trendsetter here, seeing that Midnight's Edge is actually using the term. Maybe who knows? Maybe they'll jump on it as well, and we can get some synergy going with covering this. So Midnight's Edge did a really interesting report on the He-Man movie. Are you familiar with this video, Dave?
I'm familiar with the on again, off again He-Man film that's been in development. It seems like forever, but not anything that's. I think, if I remember correctly, the last thing I heard was that there was some kind of deal where, what is it, Hasbro, whoever it is who owns. I prefer to call it Masters Universe. Whoever owns Masters Universe is basically, they have a film that they've had in development or some form of development forever. And there was some talk that they were actually looking at basically selling this in development project for Masters Universe / He-Man, I think, to Netflix or something like that. That's the last I'd heard.
Okay, so there's a lot of that's in the Midnight's Edge report. So the Midnight's Edge report, which obviously, if anybody is interested in that, they can go to Midnight's Edge and see the video. But Midnight's Edge was basically talking about the fact that Sony is the studio that currently has the rights to He-Man. He-Man is obviously owned by Mattel. Mattel actually owns the
That's
IP.
Right, Mattel.
Mattel owns the IP, but Sony has the film rights. And apparently Sony has been in development hell with He-Man for a long time. So they're finally kind of getting off of their butts and saying, we're going to do this. And there's this big rumor going around that rather than doing a theatrical release, they're just going to sell the film to Netflix and get whatever little profit they can get and not take the risk of the film failing. So this is kind of interesting. So within the context of the streaming wars, there's kind of this attitude that seems to be happening with studios like Sony that aren't quite as well prepared to weather the streaming wars as some of the other studios. That's kind of one of the main arguments of the Midnight's Edge video. Specifically, they're kind of parrying off the situation with Disney, NBC Universal, and Time Warner, all of which have digital companions with them. In terms of Time Warner, they have AT&T. In terms of NBC Universal, they have Comcast, and then Disney has acquired a company called BAMTech, and that's the one that I really want to talk about in our segment tonight on the streaming wars. Now, on the other side of this, you have Sony, Lionsgate, and Paramount, and of course, the first casualty of the streaming wars has been Fox, right? When you think about it,
Right.
Fox has decided we're out. We're done. They sold themselves off to Disney, and they're out. Which is really interesting because we covered in a previous podcast that it's sort of ironic that Fox was not able to acquire Lucasfilm. And apparently that's kind of one of the things that sent them over the edge with their management, where they're like, hey, we had our chance. We should have done this. We should have got it. We can't compete anymore. We're getting out, because they didn't have that digital partner. In fact, it's interesting, the digital, it's interesting that Hulu was actually started by NBC Universal and Fox, and Disney got into it late, and then by acquiring Fox, they basically took over Hulu, which is kind of interesting, right?
Yeah, that is weird.
So, in fact, the situation now is that NBC Universal still has a third of Hulu, but they are going to be bought out by 2024. So that's kind of interesting. So even as Disney is doing Disney Plus, and they already have ESPN Plus, we don't really talk about that because it's not, quote unquote pop culture, but it is a real factor in these streaming wars. As far as ESPN Plus is already active, Hulu's already active, and then Disney is now doing Disney Plus on top of this. So they're well situated for the streaming war, whereas these other companies really aren't. Now, Sony does have Crackle, but Crackle is a free ad-based, relatively small channel. But I personally will promote Crackle all day long because Crackle's free and it's ad-based. So they do have that. But otherwise, they're kind of in a bad position right now, and that's why they're kind of saying that they may be looking for other options, as far as He-Man and perhaps other films, where they're just going to try to take the easy way out and sell to a streaming service.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Talking about Crackle specifically, it does appear to be one of the few places you can watch St. Elmo's Fire.
Awesome. There you go. Now, I wanted to get into BAMTech specifically. That's actually the part of this segment that I really wanted to focus on. So BAMTech is the digital provider, if you will, that Disney has essentially acquired. They bought about a third stake of it several years ago. They had the option of getting a controlling stake in 2020, and they advanced that option in 2017. Okay, so it's pretty interesting. Now, BAMTech itself was actually started by Major League Baseball to promote their material online. And then apparently the NHL, National Hockey League, also got involved with BAMTech. So that's where their origin was. And apparently they've gotten so good at what they do, they ended up doing a lot of the coding for Hulu. They ended up doing a lot of the coding for HBO Now. They basically created these sites. And so they have this huge history of involvement with a lot of these very large, successful streaming services. And so when Disney saw that, what they did was they got a controlling interest. So now through BAMTech, Disney is able to be a real player in the streaming wars because it's BAMTech that has designed ESPN Plus and Disney Plus.
Interesting.
Yeah, and what's also interesting is the only real article I could find to get some specific information about BAMTech and their history and everything was a New York Times article that was from October 2017. Anything you look at right now for Disney Plus News, it just says Disney's doing this, Disney's doing that. They don't talk about BAMTech at all.
Wow, and it's interesting too because if that company helped build that infrastructure, they might also have like support contracts or something with these other services as well. It's weird because it's like I know that they reviewed, they always review all these mergers and these purchases and everything and make sure that there's no overreaching as far as a creation of a monopoly or whatever it's supposed to be. But at the same point too, if this company does have, support contracts with a lot of other players that we're not even aware of, it's weird because in a strange way, Disney through Disney Plus could actually sometimes see what they're doing, in a weird way. I don't know. Well, I don't want to get us in trouble legally by speculating, but you know what I mean? It's just a weird thing.
Well, to that point, one service I forgot to mention that BAMTech helped create was also PlayStation Vue, which is actually one of the few formats that Sony has available, because Sony does have the PlayStation 4, and the PlayStation 4 is also a platform for streaming. And in fact, that's where most of the streaming that I do on my television is on my PlayStation 4. And PlayStation Vue is essentially like cable on your PlayStation. It has like ESPN, it has all sorts of different channels on PlayStation Vue that if you get the package, and you can expand the package, like there's different package options. So it's kind of interesting there, because that is a platform that has like multiple channels on it, and it's a digital platform. And apparently, I didn't realize this, BAMTech was the one who was involved with its creation.
Interesting. Well, that's very interesting. I don't have a lot of observations other than that's very interesting. And it scares me a little bit. It's just, it's weird. It's like, if Disney wanted in a weird way, they could see, what the infrastructure for these different, services is like and what they're doing. And I don't know. I mean, it's too conspiracy theorists, but anyhow.
I did want to mention too, that interestingly enough, CBS All Access and also Showtime, which Showtime is also part of Paramount, Viacom, whatever we're going to call it right now. They are back together, Paramount and CBS. So they apparently did their streaming platforms in-house, which I think is interesting.
I wonder if that's why sometimes when they go to commercial breaks, it just hangs up like I'll keep my expletive deleted to myself. It's weird because it's like when you watch, which I have to talk a little bit about the new Discovery short that came out. But it's weird how like when I'm watching like some of the older stuff, it'll hang up when it goes to commercial breaks. Like when I'm trying to watch original series Star Trek, it hangs up when it goes to commercial break. But when I'm watching like the Discovery short, or I'm watching anything else, live TV, well, obviously live TV wouldn't, but it's weird how it's fine, but for some reason it keeps having this weird crasher when it tries to go to these commercial breaks. And this is not just plaguing CBS All Access. This plagues a lot of the different streaming service providers. They all seem to be having little issues kind of here and there in my mind. And I think they're still all trying to figure it out. It's just like the volume level problem. It's like those people who are familiar with, streaming stuff to your TV or casting it. It's like you'll be sitting there watching the show and you'll have the volume level adjusted just fine. And one commercial will come on and it's so quiet you can't really hear it in your phone. And the next one comes on and it's like blasting you out the back wall of your house. It's so loud. And I remember years ago there was this talk about that they were going to stop, because for years they always amp like the volume on the commercials, you know what I mean? To make sure people are paying attention, that kind of thing. And they'd said several years ago they were going to stop doing it as they integrated into these digital platforms because it was going to cause problems. And either everybody didn't get the memo, or they never decided to do it. And that's why like you have these commercials are just blaring loud and next one's okay. And then one's so quiet you can barely hear it. And it's a little annoying. I wish they would figure that out. So
well, they have that problem on YouTube as well, right? YouTube, the ad volume is is always way above the actual show's volume.
Right. So the thing I wanted to bring up in the Streaming Wars segment is there was some information coming out in relation to, I guess, AMC is doing some stuff, and apparently they have, and I don't have the article pulled up, and I'm not as well versed in as I should be. But apparently AMC is going to be able to get the rights to actually stream some shows, not shows, but movies actually across their app. The weird thing is that no one, well, I'm not going to say no one. I'm a little unclear on if this means that they'll be able to do it while they're still in theaters, or if it's, you know what I mean? If it's after the 3-month window that theaters have always enjoyed, they get 3 months, you know what I mean, before it goes out in home. But in a weird way, because it's technically still considered in theaters, they might be able to apparently show first run movies actually across their app. And it'll be like a streaming service fee, just like with Hulu or Disney Plus or whatever. You pay your monthly fee or whatever, and you may be able to watch certain first run movies before they go to other devices, actually through the AMC app, which I just thought that was kind of weird, but an interesting entry into this streaming wars thing that we're coming up to, because apparently AMC just wants to be what a lot of times what everybody was, just a content provider, not where they own their own content, you know what I mean? But they just want to distribute the content. But to have the opportunity to see first run stuff, while in a weird way it's not really available in home yet, and I haven't heard about anyone else having this deal, I thought that was kind of unusual and interesting.
That is interesting. It's not unprecedented. Obviously, with the whole video on demand thing, this has happened before. It's usually with a limited release. A lot of these, what will happen is a lot of films are basically given sort of a limited, almost like art house release, or they're only in theaters for a couple of weeks, and then they simultaneously have a video on demand release that coincides with a theatrical release. This has been tried on several films, especially, like I said, like some foreign films and things like that get a very limited release in the United States.
Right.
They'll have a simultaneous video on demand release. So it's not unprecedented, but it is interesting that AMC, the theater, is actually being involved with this, because my understanding is, like, previously it would be like, yeah, the movie's coming out in AMC or wherever they're having it, and then the video's on iTunes, So
right.
It's not integrated. So this is a little bit of a game changer in terms of that, as far as I know. But in terms of the basic idea, it has been done. It doesn't seem like it's been that successful, because it doesn't seem like it's been that widespread. But perhaps this might be the way to make that work.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm thinking too, because we have more people that are kind of adapting, going to streaming anyway, more cord cutters, if you will. We have more and more people kind of coming online, as more services are, because also too, as these services are rolling out what they're doing, we're getting a lot of different companies pouring money into advertising, educating people and making them aware that they have these streaming options, So it's going to continue to proliferate and go and grow and whatever. But I just thought it was, because this is the first time I've heard of literally like a movie theater chain finding a way to kind of be in and on the streaming war game. And I thought it was kind of an interesting thing that was worth bringing up. Like I said, I've heard a couple of things. I read a couple of things. I'm not as well knowledgeable about it as I probably should, but I think it's something our audience should be aware of if they want to look into it. But yeah, apparently AMC has signed some kind of a deal or a contract where they're going to be able to probably get movies that were first run in theaters probably before they're available on some of the other services.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And like I think you mentioned, as far as I know, AMC is not involved in the publishing studio game at all. They're not owned by a studio or anything like that, are they?
Well, I mean, AMC, technically, there is the AMC channel. I mean, they do Walking Dead and whatever, so maybe it is all connected. I'm not sure. I honestly don't know enough about it. I just think of AMC as a movie chain,
Right.
like a movie theater chain first. But there is the AMC channel that's on cable, and you've got Walking Dead and Breaking Bad, and there's been a bunch of different shows that have been on that channel. So I don't know. The line, that's what the thing is, as we're moving further in, the lines are getting more and more blurred, as in terms of like, who's doing what and whatever else. It's getting, in my mind anyway, a little confusing to keep it all straight. But it's possible that AMC also produces and has content that they own as well.
Well, back in the day, obviously, when the studio system was flourishing, studios did actually own the theaters. They were together. In fact, that's kind of what started the studio system. It was theater owners decided, hey, I want to make my own movies because I need content for my theater. So in sort of the golden age or the beginning of cinema, theater owners and studio owners were one and the same. And then at some point, I think actually the federal government stepped in and did some trust busting and broke them up. And as far as I know, that's still the way it is. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I don't think any studios own theater chains.
Yeah, I was just pulling it up, just kind of looking. Yeah, they do have subsidiaries such as AMC Entertainment, which I think that is basically like your Walking Dead and your Breaking Bad. So I do think that they do have content that they would quote unquote own. So yeah, interesting. All right.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. So that's my that was my thing I had for the streaming wars segment. So at this point in the show, we normally segue into our main topic. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about Star Trek Discovery for just a little bit. Now, Eric, by any chance, did you see any of the trailers or the teaser stuff for the Trouble with Edward short that they recently released?
Yes, I saw the teaser. I did see the teaser trailer.
Well, I was kind of excited about it last episode because I'm a big fan of H. John Benjamin, who's the voice of Coach McGurk on Home Movies. Home Movies is one of my favorite animated shows of all time. I love Home Movies. I still rewatch it to this day. Of course, he's also the voice of Archer. For people that are familiar with that show, he's just got great comedic timing. And just to me, when I hear that voice, it's just so iconic for crazy, outlandish stuff. So when I hear him talking, I know something crazy is going to happen. And then also, too, I quite like the Battle Angel Aleta movie that came out recently with Rosa Salazar, and she's also in the short as well. The basic upsell, which you can get from the trailer, it's not a big, huge spoiler. Basically, she's been promoted to captain of a science vessel, and H. John Benjamin is one of the crew, one of the scientists serving on board this science vessel. Now, I know that some people did not enjoy the Q&A short, which came out before, which, of course, was number one in Spock, basically trapped in the turbo lift, and people had all kinds of issues and problems with it. I've seen all kinds of people, admonishing it for all kind of multitude of reasons. A lot of people really hoping that Michael Chabon did not actually write it because some people don't like it and they're nervous about Picard now because they didn't like Q&A. In any creative environment, as I'm sure you're well, Eric, there's always a lot of give and take. So even though you may have written something, or you may have directed something, or you may have drawn something, if you're in a collaborative environment where you're talking about, film, television, or even comic books, for example, in a creative environment, you're going to have a little bit of give and take, right? So
it's a collaborative process. In fact, there's been some back and forth on Twitter about this in terms of Chabon's involvement with that short trek. He's credited as the writer. He's credited on IMDb as the writer. But like you were just saying, film is a collaborative process, and it is not it's not uncommon for the script to undergo changes right there on the set. And it's still not uncommon for essentially ghostwriting to happen when they make those changes. Sometimes the director will make changes, not so much in television. In film, that's more common. But there is definitely ghostwriting that goes on. Discovery itself does have a writer's room, so I don't know how much they get involved with these shorts, but I'm sure they do.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is because I enjoyed Q&A. It's not the best Star Trek thing ever made, but I really enjoyed it. Particularly, I really, really liked Rebecca Romijn as number one. I think Ethan Peck's doing a good job as Spock, but the big standout from that is I just really liked Rebecca Romijn's portrayal of number one, and I've liked it in everything I've seen. And it's interesting because when I think of Rebecca Romijn, I immediately think of like her playing Mystique in the X-Men movies. And she was good, but I feel like she's grown a lot as an actress, and I really like her portrayal of number one, specifically because I actually read one of those when they did I can't remember which anniversary it was. They did one of the one of the anniversaries. had a series of novels, new novels, and one of them focused on number one. And either she read that or someone told her about it or someone was coaching her, because she really embodied a lot of the mannerisms and the character traits that were coming across from that that particular Star Trek novel. And in my opinion, that's what I thought anyway. So here's the trouble with Edward. Now, that is also the title of this, but there is also some trouble with Edward. I did not enjoy this short at all. I think it's one of the few things from Star Trek Discovery that I've seen, and I was just like going, okay, I see the production values. I like the cast. They clearly spent a lot of money, and there's a lot of effort that went into it. I don't want to denigrate any of the people involved. I know everyone was giving their best and trying, but I didn't really care for the trouble with Edward like at all. It just didn't work, I think. We talked the last episode. I said that maybe this might be a precursor for what they're doing with Lower Decks, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. It's the first Discovery thing I've seen, and I'm just like, oh, no, I don't like that at all.
Well, what do you think of that? There is an accusation going around Twitter as far as what do you think about these short treks kind of being, CBS All Access kind of trying to get into Orville territory?
Well, I could see that specifically with this particular short trek, and but I'm going to be honest with you, just in terms of comedy and stuff, it just doesn't work. I in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, I felt like it didn't work. The Orville has some absolutely hilarious stuff. Like the whole prank episode was hilarious. That's one of the fun. I even had people at my day job coming up to me, ask me if I'd seen it, and they'd be laughing while they were talking about it. I mean, the Orville is I think is quite good. And every episode I've seen of it, I've really enjoyed it. But if this particular short trek is the Discovery Group trying to show they can do what the Orville does, I don't know. I don't know about this. I mean, it's one of those things, comedy is all about timing and delivery. And it was weird because there were elements of this short trek that were a little too, at times, serious. And I've gotten so used to the tone of Discovery that watching this, where all of a sudden it's supposed to be silly, I just couldn't take it as that. I couldn't take it as funny, because Discovery has lighter moments in it, just like original series and stuff has lighter moments in it. But it's not slapstickish, you know what I mean? And this had a couple of obvious slapstickish moments, and those were the ones that were the most, in my mind, just kind of weird. They just didn't work. But yeah, I'm going on record.
I will say this, as far as comedy in Trek, I mean, it's there. I mean, there is something to work with. There is precedent for this. I'd probably say that the most precedent for it is Deep Space Nine with the Ferengi, because they almost did get slapstickish with the Ferengi in Deep Space Nine. They were pretty much a joke. Even in Next Generation, they kind of became a joke. So you can do comedy in Star Trek, I think. I think there's room for it. But personally, just my reaction from the teasers of both of those treks, my major issue is that I feel like they're trying to take away from Orville, or they're trying to emulate Orville, and I don't see the need for it when they're already going to be coming out with their own comedy with Lower Decks.
Right, and I'm honestly, like I said, this is the first thing that I was just like, yeah, I didn't care for this. There's things about Discovery, like I wasn't a big fan of the new Klingon look, and there's different things about Discovery I wasn't a big fan of. But for the most part, like I said, I'm on record as saying I quite enjoyed Discovery. Season 2 I felt like was the best. I am a big fan of Captain Pike and all the episodes that focused on him. And I liked Q&A quite a lot. I had fun with that one. But this Trouble with Edward one, it just had a couple of beats in it that were just too outlandish, because Discovery has tried so hard to set such a tone and in its own way be grounded, that just those really slapstickish moments, I was just like, this is just, I don't know. It just didn't work. It just didn't, for me, in my opinion, it didn't work.
Yeah, I hear you. And
Go ahead.
I did want to actually, I forgot that there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about in our news segment. And again, it's not like a big story, but I think it's something that our listeners would be interested in. And it's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I accidentally shared the image earlier, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the Seventh Rule podcast. You're familiar with that, aren't you, Dave?
Yes.
So the Seventh Rule podcast was founded by Aaron Eisenberg, who played Nog on Deep Space Nine. He has since passed, which I'm sure most of our listeners are aware of. He did the show with Sirach, who played Jake on Deep Space Nine, and also with Ryan Husk, I believe is his name. Actually, Ryan is one of the producers of a film that I'm involved with, actually, with Assassin's Apprentice. So I hope I didn't mess his name up. But they did a podcast together, and there was a recent episode. I believe it just dropped in early October. I want to say it dropped on October 3rd, but I only got to see it this weekend. And they actually had Garrett from Star Trek Voyager, Garrett Wong.
Garrett, okay, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
So he played Harry Kim on Star Trek Voyager. They had him on the show, and it's pretty interesting. Are you familiar with the history between Garrett and Aaron?
I'm sorry, you broke up there real quick.
Are you familiar with the history between Garrett and Aaron?
A little bit. I'm not exactly sure where we're going with it. I'm going to just come out and say I'm not sure.
Well, they did a podcast together called the Alpha Quadrant. Did you ever hear about that? Or
No, that I'm not familiar with at all. No.
Okay, so they did a podcast together called the Alpha Quadrant. In fact, last year at Star Trek Las Vegas, they were promoting it. They actually had a panel where Garrett and Aaron were actually talking about this podcast that they were doing, which I was already familiar with because it was already kind of around the Twitterverse with Star Trek fans. Aaron was really, really active on Twitter. He was the kind of person that would actually, like your posts. If you tagged him, he would interact, all that kind of stuff. He was really, really good with Twitter. And so I was aware of the fact that he was doing this podcast with Garrett. And they were, what they did was they reviewed the first season of Discovery, and then they started reviewing Voyager. I think Voyager and Deep Space Nine episodes, like they would alternate. I think that's what they were doing.
Okay.
And then what happened was there was a falling out between the producer and Aaron. And it was a really messy thing. It wasn't handled very well at all. It kind of blew up all over Twitter. And there were some pretty mean-spirited accusations by the producer against Aaron. And it was just a big mess. Big mess. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because on the podcast, and like I said, I think it dropped October 3rd, but I have the little graphic up for the Seventh Rule. It was really interesting. They had Garrett on with his wife, and they were doing a tribute to Aaron. And I just think as a fan, it's a really interesting thing to see because Garrett's very open and honest about what happened between him and Aaron. And he talks about what happened and gives a little bit of the behind the scenes of, first of all, how they even started to do the podcast, because Garrett claims that he was the one who actually came up with the idea with the producer, and they approached Aaron about it, which is interesting. Because then Aaron basically decided to do his own podcast with Sirach.
Right.
So it's a really interesting thing. And if, as big Trek fans, it's something that I recommend for people to take a look at, because Garrett says some really nice things about Aaron. But what I like is that he's honest about their falling out and the issues that they had, because you don't see that a lot in these kind of situations, especially with the level of honesty where he really gives sort of the deep dish of what happened behind the scenes with that podcast. And it relates to us also, because obviously we're doing a podcast, and it's just interesting to see how that kind of stuff works, with celebrities and things like that. So I recommend that episode to people. Especially also if you were actually listening to the Alpha Quadrant podcast and always kind of wonder what the heck went on. Garrett's very open and honest about it, so I do recommend it to fans if you're interested. And also, they do a lot of tributes to Aaron.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, so I guess it's time to enter into our main topic. For those people who may be watching this show live that's not too terribly familiar with Rogues Radio Podcast, we normally talk about kind of retro. We do a lot of retrospective segments. We do a lot of, talking about, older movies and TV shows and stuff like that, revisiting them. And what we had discussed for this particular episode is doing a favorite comics from yesteryear kind of a segment. So I picked a comic that I was just going to talk about. We're just going to kind of do this just kind of briefly. But it's one of my favorite comic books from growing up. So people have probably heard this story before, but way back when, when you would go and buy comics, a lot of times you'd be buying them off of a spinner rack. So for some of those viewers or listeners right now that may not be too familiar with this, but it was literally what it sounds like. It's a rack that spins, and they would put comics in it. Then you would get them at a 7-Eleven, any kind of sort of like little quick stop type stores or whatever. Sometimes you'd see them in like drugstores, that kind of thing. And that's where I bought a lot of my early comic books. And I've told this story before, but I'll go ahead and tell it again and try to be quick. But one of the places I used to go and buy my comics from was a 7-Eleven. And it was around the corner from where I lived when I was growing up. And the 7-Eleven, I would always ask the clerk who worked there, if he could try and get some Batman comics, because they never had Batman comics in the spinner rack. And I was a big Batman fan. And so I'd always pester him. Well, I walked into the 7-Eleven one day, and he's like, "We got Batman comic." I was like, "You do?" He's like, "Yeah, we got Batman comics." I was so excited. Ran back to the spinner rack, spun it around until I found it. And what I actually found on the spinner rack, if Eric will pull it up, was actually this copy of Hex from DC Comics. This is Hex number 11. And as you can clearly see, this is Batman, but it's obviously not going to be the real Batman. But this particular story is actually titled Night of the Batman. So again, I said this is from 1986. I'm going to read a quick little blurb on here and run down the creative cast real quick. If you're interested to see some additional thoughts about this, if you visit my website at davebeatty.com, I did a favorite comics from yesteryear. It's actually a written piece all about this that you can view and read on there, and it's from March 26th of 2018. But we're kind of revisiting this because this is one of my favorite comic books. So I've got a little blurb here from the Batman from 2050 AD, because that's who this is. He's talking, there's a flashback segment where he talks about, but compassion was in short supply after the Holocaust, while the desire to find scapegoats seemed to have no end. One organization of crazed fanatics, the National Reconstruction Alliance, focused their hatred on two groups, advocates for arms control and Jews. My parents, God help them, were both. So the basic tenor of this story, this particular version of Batman, he basically operates in this post-apocalyptic future. These are the Hex stories that people talk about are the worst, by the way. These are the Hex in the future. So you've got a Wild West gunslinger basically in a Mad Max type future. This group recruits Hex to basically take out this version of Batman. He protects New York. That was his Gotham City. It's actually New York in this. And he actually operates out of the Statue of Liberty, which is why you see them fighting here on the Statue of Liberty. And this Batman has one rule, only one rule: no guns in New York, period. He doesn't care who you are, good, bad, indifferent. He doesn't care. If you have a gun, he's going to kick the tar out of you and he's going to take it away because he allows no guns in New York, period. That's the only rule he enforces. Well, there's this government organization that wants to come in and basically take control back of New York from these different gangs. It's actually a government organization. If you read this story, they seem like they might be a little shady, but they also might be trying to do a little good. But at the same point, they create basically a situation where they trick Jonah Hex into thinking that Batman has basically beaten and potentially killed his girlfriend snuff film style, okay? So creates this situation. It basically brings Jonah Hex against this future version of Batman. Now, the writer and the editor of this was Michael Fleischer. The art was by Mark Texera, who was on pencils. The inks were by Jose Garzon and Pablo Marcos, who apparently shared the inking credits on this particular issue. The letters were by someone named Maz, and that's the only credit they give this person. I don't know more than that. And then the colors are by someone credited as La Rose. So I don't know. You'll have to read into that all you will. But I love this particular comic. We're gonna look at a couple of more images here if I can get them to open up. This is a fun. Hold on, we're skipping ahead. Hold on. Here's a shot of Jonah Hex, where he's basically being approached by this government organization, and they're trying to talk him into coming and helping him out. And he basically says, for what he did for my girlfriend, I'm gonna take him out. I always love the art in this particular issue, and you can see the printing is pretty suspect here. Here's a shot of Batman making this version of Batman making his solemn vow. I vowed that as long as I live, there will be no firearms allowed in New York. And if the Combine, this is this government organization, or anyone else tries to stop me from keeping that vow, God help them. Now, he actually was interested in studying criminals, this particular version of Batman, and he was studying to be basically a detective, and he deduced who Batman was in this story. And so he actually went to Wayne Manor, and while he was trying to find the entrance for the Batcave, this nuclear holocaust basically happened, and he ended up being trapped in the Batcave. So when he reemerged after the Holocaust had happened, he basically had access to all of Batman's gears and gadgets, the Batmobile, the Batwing, the Batsuit, all the gadgets. And so he trained himself and basically turned himself into the new Batman. But he is using a lot of Batman's actual gear that he actually got from the Batcave. But a lot of it's been moved to the Statue of Liberty, which is where he operates out of. And then I've always quite liked this bat suit they gave him. If Eric will flip over here to the video, you can see it. I've always quite liked this particular version of the bat suit from this particular iteration of the Batman. So anyhow, this is my comic that I selected for our little segment we're doing here on favorite comics from yesteryear. We'll do this every once in a while. I'll pick one. Eric will pick one. It's kind of just a fun, different kind of little thing to talk about because we're trying to integrate comic book reviews as well as into our other content where we're talking about TV shows and movies and that kind of stuff. So tell me, Eric, have you ever, you may have heard me talk about this one before. Have you heard me talk about this comic before?
No, I'm honestly kind of shocked. I'm almost speechless. Like, this is definitely like an Elseworlds kind of book, right? So
yeah, for sure.
It's really interesting, and you can't help but say it, but it's really interesting how topical it kind of is because obviously gun control is a huge issue right now, and it's kind of interesting just from that perspective of this version of Batman. Well, Batman, I think traditionally, I should say traditionally in the context of what Batman has kind of evolved into and become. Certainly, Batman is anti-gun, but the original Batman did carry a gun.
Right. In the very, very early appearances, yes, he did use a gun.
The very early original Batman did carry a gun. And then, of course, as the mythos kind of got more established and everything, that was eliminated, and it was very clear that Batman is anti-gun. We were talking off the air last time about Batman Beyond, and there's a big thing about in Batman Beyond. That's a huge part of Batman Beyond of why Bruce Wayne stopped being Batman because he's so anti-gun. Because he actually almost had to use a gun to defend himself because he was incapable of defending himself.
Right.
So there is that theme in the sort of, I guess, modern canon of Batman. But it is interesting, the idea that his whole motivation, I guess, or whatever, is to keep guns out of New York City. Because in a lot of ways, that really is sort of a explosive, very topical thing. There are people that are very committed on both sides of that issue about that particular issue.
No, yeah, and it's interesting because again, this is from 1986, and the creator, the Michael Fleischer, who was the editor and the writer, so that he obviously had a lot to say, you know what I mean, with this particular book, because basically it was under his charge and he wrote this story. So it's just very interesting for those people. They're curious to check it out. Now here's the flip side, and this is the last part of this particular story I have for this comic book and this version of Batman. I did not find Hex 12, the conclusion of this storyline, until literally about a year or so ago. And I finally got to finish it. I have been looking for it all this time. I could have bought it probably off the internet at different periods, and I kind of thought about it. But I'm one of those like old school guy who likes to be at a convention or in a comic book store and find it in a back issue bin. I like to wax poetic and be nostalgic for finding comics that way. And for this particular,
it's all about the thrill of the hunt, right?
Yeah, and for this particular one, that's how I wanted to find it. I wanted to find it in the wild, in a comic book store or at a convention, somewhere where there'd be people around that they could, see my reaction to it. And it was very interesting because when I found it, it was actually in a 50-cent box at they're in Glendale. I can't remember the name of the store, which is really bad. I should be able to remember it. But I found it. Yeah, we were doing Glendale Glitters, and the gentleman who owns the store, we would sometimes be outside and we would do signing events and sketches and stuff for people during the Glendale Glitters, which is a big Christmas event. And he would let us go in where he would be having these big back issue sales, and they'd be all these comics they bought from collections or whatever, different things, and they're just really cheap, back issue books you can buy, 50 cents, 25 cents, $1. And I actually found Hex number 12 in one of those boxes. And so my friend the Janimal, who's been the co-host off and on for quite some time for the video version of this show, well, I guess this is a new video version of this show, but the original video version of the show, the retrospective show, he was actually there, and he heard me almost scream with joy. And I talked about how long I've been looking for this book and how I was so excited to go back and read it. So it was very fun when I finally ran across this particular issue, because I'd literally been looking for it for decades.
That's very, very cool.
So unless, do you have anything else that you want to add or anything else that you want to talk about?
Well, actually, relating to the thrill of the hunt, and this is something that we may go ahead and edit out of the actual audio podcast. But I thought, because I have this stuff right here, and we were talking about off the air, I thought for anybody that's watching the video or watches the video later, they might get a thrill out of this, because just this weekend I was out looking for Dark Crystal figures for my daughter. And because she actually really likes Dark Crystal, The Age of Resistance. And a lot of people might not be aware that there are actually Dark Crystal toys available right now. They're very hard to find. You can find them online pretty easy. They're pretty easy to order online. But like you were saying, it's all about the thrill of the hunt. And this is about as appropriate as you can get as far as thrill of the hunt. This is the Hunter figure. And I'm going to go ahead and blow that up, the Hunter figure from Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. Very cool. This was a very hard figure for us to find. And it's a really cool figure. I'll be taking him out because my daughter does plan to take her figure. She got both of the Gelflings, and she got Hup, right? Hup is the the podling. Yeah. So she got that, and I wish I had those to show as well. But this is my figure, so that's the one that I'm going to show on the air. But like you said, it really is. I'm old school this way, and it was kind of fun doing that with my daughter and showing her how, because we went to so many stores trying to find this, because it's interesting. Actually, Walmart and Target both have big Funko sections, and this is a Funko product. It's a Funko product. And it was interesting that we couldn't find it anywhere at any of the retail stores. We actually had to go to the Collectors Marketplace, which is a local store in Phoenix that actually has a lot of different collectibles in terms of anime, in terms of Star Wars, in terms of whatever, and they had this. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then also, we were talking about, I should have actually read this because we were talking about this off the air. We got a Dark Crystal comic, which is this is a prequel to the Age of Resistance. And the version we got here is whoops, messed up on there. The version we got is the customized version, because I happen to have a really good friend that's an awesome artist. So I got the customizable one. And I'll leave the audience to figure out who that person might be. But this is the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance prequel, and it's called The Quest of the Dual Glaive. So my daughter got that as well, and I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't read it. It's technically my daughter's book, but I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't read it because it would have been kind of fun to review on the show.
No, yeah, well, maybe for next time, because like I said, I love having comic book reviews be a part of the show, and then actually too, I've been talking to someone else, another comic book guest, probably to be bringing on the show here pretty soon. And apologies to him. We've been trying to work this out, and I've been so busy. It's been hard for me to coordinate everybody. But we will be having another comic book interview coming up here pretty soon. And then people who've been listening to the show for hopefully a great period of time will remember that I did review, what was it? Revenge of Planet WrestleTopia, I believe was the name of it. And they have another couple of issues that have come out, and they've requested that if we have the time and we will look at it, we could actually read them and review them for the show. I quite enjoyed the first two issues. So Eric, if you were game, I was going to get you the review copies of that and then these new ones, and then maybe we could talk about those on an upcoming episode as well, because it's going to be dropping on Comixology here pretty soon. And that was kind of a fun thing. So it's always fun. Again, so if you're an independent comic book creator out there and you're listening to the show right now, and you think it'd be fun to be on the Rogues Radio Live, this particular version, or obviously the Rogues Radio podcast, the audio version, definitely, reach out to us, either leave a comment, send us an email. Just a bunch of different ways you can contact us, either through the Facebook page or through Twitter or whatever. You can get a message to us that you're interested in having us, review your comic book, your graphic novel, whatever on the show. I'm always game to read and talk about comics. I love comics, so this is always a fun topic for me.
Yeah, one of the things you and I have been talking about that's so exciting about this new format is that we do have the capability to actually show screen images and show people art from these books.
And that's a big thing too, especially as we're bringing more comic book creators and stuff, onto the show. It'll be fun where we can actually show, look at this, and people can see why we're excited about this material, about why we think this is cool or why we think this is interesting. You'll be able to see it, and then you'll be like, oh yeah, that's cool. I want to check that out, because a lot of times the art, as I always say, the art sells the book, but the writing makes you pick up issue 2. That's the way it always works. That a lot of people.
I love that. I love that philosophy. It's 100% true. That's 100% true.
Yeah. So, but no, yeah. But this is it's always fun to talk about comics here on the show. So,
awesome.
If that sounds good to you, I think we might be done.
We still have to do our outro, right?
Yeah, we're gonna do the outro. You guys have to bear with us. This is a little behind the scenes when we do this live, because usually between recording segments, Eric and I will discuss what we're going to do next real briefly, before we go into it. But this will be our outro segment, so I'm going to go ahead and get all queued up for that. So,
yeah, that's a big part of this new format for our viewers and listeners. Is that obviously this format is supposed to be sort of a behind the scenes look at the recording of the show, and sort of meant to supplement. It's not that we're going to stop doing the audio podcasts. We're going to be using these to kind of supplement each other, and this format is meant to allow us to be a little bit more visual, and also to allow us to maybe be a little bit more topical on top of things, because the broadcast is live, so the material is out there right away. But it's going to allow us to do some additional things, but we're not going to stop doing the audio podcast. It'll be still put together from this. Yeah,
for sure. So we'll go ahead and we'll get into the outro here.
Did you want to put the graphic back up?
Yeah, let's do that. Sorry, everybody. We're still figuring this all out. Eventually, I'll have it kind of programmed, as it were. But yeah, let me find it.
Well, this is part of the fun of the show. Is again, especially as we develop our audience, people will get to see our gaffes and our flubs and everything, you know. And
all right, so let's see. All right, so there we go. All right, so I want to thank you for listening to this episode and possibly watching live this particular episode of the Rogues Radio Podcast. Again, my name is Dave Beatty, and I've been one of your hosts. I hope that you find this interesting. You'll go to my website and check out some of my art, see what I've got going on over there. There's lots of, if you're interested in collecting art, I've got lots of sketches posted on there, as well as sketch cards, all kinds of fun stuff, as well as links to all my different social media, such as Instagram and Twitter, where I post all different kinds of different things I'm working on, whether it's, you know, updates on Red Skirts, whether it's just a random sketch that I did the night before, whatever it is that's kind of striking my fancy. You can always see all the latest and the greatest through my social media through my website. That's davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. I want to thank Eric Alexander, my co-host, for coming aboard and providing those great co-host duties and always bringing his insight that he's bringing in terms of the news and all that kind of fun stuff. Thanks for being on the show again, Eric.
Well, I appreciate being here. And of course, if anybody is looking for me out there in the Twitterverse, my handle is @BaseGod14. It's @BASSGOD14. I'm actually hosting the show tonight on my YouTube channel, which is the same. So obviously, if you're watching this, you know where that is. But it's always great to be here. And please always keep in mind my production company, Bad Bob Productions.
All right. Very cool.